The night Dominic Hale bought me was supposed to disappear before sunrise, but some nights do not end just because the sun comes up. They follow you home, hide under your skin, and wait until your whole life begins to change. My name was Ethan Walker, and before that night, I was just a 22-year-old Omega trying to survive in Chicago with 2 part-time jobs, a broken phone, and a last name nobody important remembered. I had learned to keep my head down, to smile when men in expensive coats looked through me, and to never ask why my stepfather came home smelling like whiskey and bad decisions. But debt has a sound. It sounds like fists on an apartment door at midnight. It sounds like your name whispered by strangers. It sounds like someone you trusted saying, "You will thank me later," while signing away the last piece of your freedom. They dressed me in a black suit that did not belong to me and drove me 30 miles outside the city to a private estate hidden behind iron gates and snow-covered pine trees. No one called it an auction, but everyone in that golden room knew exactly what it was. Crystal lights burned above us. Soft music played from somewhere behind the walls. Men with perfect smiles lifted numbered cards as if they were choosing art, not people. I stood on a small platform with my hands clenched so tightly my nails left marks in my palms, telling myself not to shake, not to cry, not to let any alpha in that room smell my fear. Then the doors opened, and every conversation died. Dominic Hale walked in like the room had been built for him to enter last. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal coat over a black shirt, his pale hair brushed back, his face calm in a way that made calm feel dangerous. I had heard his name before in whispers at the diner, in news reports that never said enough, in the fearful silence that followed the words Hale family. Mafia Alpha. King of the North Side. The man people did not refuse twice. He did not bid like the others. He did not smile. He looked at me once, and something in his silver-gray eyes changed so quickly I almost thought I imagined it. The host began speaking about my age. My designation, my health records, all of it in a polished voice that made my stomach turn cold, but Dominic raised one hand and the man stopped. "Enough," Dominic said. His voice was low, controlled, and final. "I will take him." A nervous laugh moved through the room, but no one challenged him. The host named a price that made several alphas shift in their seats. Dominic did not blink. He signed a single paper, and just like that, the room decided I belonged to him for one night. When he stepped onto the platform, I forced myself not to move back. He was close enough that I could see a faint scar near his jaw and the tired shadow beneath his eyes. He reached for my wrist, not roughly, only to guide me down, but the second his fingers touched my skin, the air changed. The light seemed too bright. The music seemed too far away. Dominic went still. His grip did not tighten, but his whole body sharpened, as if he had heard a gunshot no one else could hear. His gaze dropped to the inside of my wrist, then to my throat, where an old faded scar crossed the place my scent should have been strongest. I had been told that scar meant nothing. A childhood injury. Bad luck. Something I should cover and forget. But Dominic stared at it like it was a secret pulled from a grave. "Who are you?" he asked, so quietly only I could hear. I swallowed, my voice barely steady. "Nobody." For the first time that night, the great Dominic Hale looked almost angry, but not at me. At the room. At the men watching. At the invisible hands that had placed me there. He removed his coat and set it over my shoulders, hiding me from their eyes. "Do not speak to anyone," he said. "Stay beside me." I should have hated him. Maybe I did. He had bought the night like all the others wanted to. But as he led me through the silent crowd, no one dared reach for me, no one dared laugh, and no one dared say my price out loud again. Outside, the cold hit my face, clean and sharp. His black car waited under the falling snow. Before I stepped inside, I looked back at the mansion, at the glowing windows and the shadows behind them, and I understood something that made my bones go cold. Dominic Hale had not been the only person watching me. Somewhere above the front doors, behind a curtain on the second floor, a woman in white stood perfectly still, smiling as if the night had gone exactly the way she planned. The ride back to Chicago felt longer than 30 miles, not because Hale said too much, but because he said almost nothing at all. I sat in the back of his black car with his coat still wrapped around my shoulders, watching snow streak across the tinted window while the city lights grew brighter in the distance. His driver kept his eyes on the road. Dominic sat beside me with one gloved hand resting on his knee and the other holding his phone, but he did not make a call. He only looked out at the highway like he was trying to solve a problem that had followed him for years and suddenly learned my name. I wanted to ask why he had looked at my scar that way. I wanted to ask who the woman in white had been, and why her smile had made my blood feel colder than the weather outside. Instead, I held my breath and counted the exits until the car turned into a private underground garage beneath a glass tower near the river. No one touched me. No one ordered me to hurry. Dominic walked me through a quiet elevator, down a hallway that smelled faintly of cedar and winter air, and into a penthouse so high above the city that Chicago looked almost peaceful from the windows. He told a housekeeper to bring warm food and clean clothes, then dismissed everyone with a single look. When we were alone, he stood across the room from me, careful to keep distance, as if distance was the only polite thing left between us. "You are safe here until morning," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes kept returning to the scar near my throat. "After that, you can leave with enough money to start over. No one from tonight will follow you." I should have felt relieved. I should have thanked him. But all I heard was until morning. Another deadline. Another man deciding when my life would open and close. "So that is it?" I asked. "You buy me, hide me, and then send me away like I was never here?" Something moved across his face, quick and unreadable. "That is the cleanest ending I can give you." I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Clean for who?" He did not answer. The silence between us filled the penthouse until I could hear the soft hum of the heater and the distant rush of traffic far below. When the food came, I could barely eat. Dominic left me in a guest room with a lock on the inside, not the outside, and that detail almost broke me more than cruelty would have. I slept in pieces, waking from dreams of golden lights, numbered cards, and a woman in white watching from above. Before dawn, I found an envelope on the table by the door. Inside was cash, a new phone, a key card for a motel paid for 3 months, and a note in Dominic's sharp handwriting: "Forget my name. For your own safety." He was waiting near the elevator when I came out, dressed in the same dark colors, his expression carved from stone. He did not ask me to stay. He did not explain the scar. He only placed his coat over my arm and said, "Do not go back to your stepfather." I wanted to throw the envelope at him. I wanted to ask why he cared where I went if he was already letting me leave. But pride was the only thing I had left, so I lifted my chin and walked into the elevator without saying goodbye. For the next 2 weeks, I tried to become invisible. I rented a small room above a closed laundromat in Wicker Park, bought cheap groceries, and found morning shifts at a coffee shop where nobody knew my past. I changed my number. I stopped using my last name. I told myself Dominic Hale was a nightmare with expensive shoes and gray eyes, nothing more. But every night, I woke with the same strange warmth under my skin, like my body remembered a place my mind was trying to erase. And across the city, though I did not know it yet, Dominic was not sleeping either. He stood in his office above the river, refusing meetings, ignoring calls, staring at the coat I had returned as if it carried an answer. On the 15th morning, I dropped a tray of coffee cups at work because the room suddenly tilted sideways. My manager asked if I had eaten. I nodded, then stepped into the restroom, gripped the sink, and stared at my pale reflection. The old scar at my throat looked darker than before. Beneath it, my pulse beat fast and uneven, like something inside me was waking up. Then my new phone buzzed for the first time with a blocked number, and the message on the screen made my knees nearly give out. Ethan, if anyone from the Hale family contacts you, do not answer. Run. The message stayed on my phone screen until the letters blurred, and for a few seconds I could not remember how to breathe. Ethan, if anyone from the Hale family contacts you, do not answer. Run. There was no signature, but it did not need one. I knew that cold, careful warning belonged to Dominic Hale, and somehow that made it worse. My manager knocked on the restroom door and asked if I was okay. I told her I needed 5 minutes, but my voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone standing at the other end of a tunnel. When I stepped back into the coffee shop, the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon syrup hit me so hard I nearly bent over. I had worked morning shifts for years. I had lived on diner coffee and cheap pastries when money was tight. That smell had never hurt me before. Now it turned my stomach, made the lights too bright, made every sound scrape against my nerves. My manager took one look at my face and told me to go home. I made it 2 blocks before the sidewalk tilted again. A woman walking a golden retriever caught my arm before I could fall, and for one terrifying second, I thought she was one of them. But she only asked whether I needed an ambulance. I said no, because people like me learned early that hospitals asked questions, and questions made paper trails. Instead, I found a small clinic tucked between a pharmacy and a tax office, the kind of place with faded posters, plastic chairs, and a receptionist who did not look surprised by anything. I gave them my first name only and paid cash from the envelope Dominic had left me. The nurse checked my blood pressure, asked a few routine questions, and then paused when she saw the scar near my throat. Her smile became professional in a way that felt practiced. The doctor came in 20 minutes later, a woman in her 50s with silver hair, kind eyes, and a name tag that said Dr. Helen Morris. She asked if I had been under stress. I almost laughed. Instead, I said yes. She ordered blood work and a scan, then told me to wait. The room was cold enough that I kept my jacket zipped, but sweat gathered at the back of my neck. I kept thinking of Dominic standing near the elevator, telling me not to go back to my stepfather. I kept thinking of the woman in white behind the curtain. When Dr. Morris returned, she closed the door slowly and sat across from me instead of standing. That was when I knew my life had changed again. Ethan, she said gently, you are pregnant. The word landed so softly that it took a moment to break me. I stared at her, waiting for the room to correct itself, waiting for her to explain that there had been a mistake. That is not possible, I whispered, even though some part of me already knew it was. She looked down at the test results, then back at me with something close to awe and fear mixed together. There is more, she said. Your hormone levels are unusual, and the early markers are extremely rare. This child carries a dominant alpha signature. Not just strong. Heir level strong. My hands went cold. I had heard stories about heir level children, the kind powerful families built alliances around, the kind people whispered about like blessings and curses. Please do not put that in my file, I said. Dr. Morris did not ask why. She only folded the paper and lowered her voice. Then listen to me carefully. If the father is connected to any major alpha family, you need to leave Chicago today. Not tomorrow. Today. I wanted to tell her the father was not just connected to a major alpha family. He was the Hale family. He was the man other alphas feared to name too loudly. But saying it would make everything real, and it was already too real. The doctor handed me vitamins, a list of safe clinics outside Illinois, and a card with her personal number written on the back. You are not property, she said, as if she had seen that fear in too many Omega faces. Neither is your child. I walked out through the side door with my hood up and one hand pressed lightly against my stomach, not because there was anything to feel yet, but because I suddenly needed to protect something I had not known existed an hour before. The street looked normal. Cars passed. A man argued into his phone. Snow melted along the curb in gray slush. Then I saw it across the road, parked beneath a bare maple tree. A black SUV with tinted windows, clean enough to reflect the clinic sign. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. This time, the message was from an unknown number. "Mr. Walker, the Hale family would like to bring you home." I did not move toward the SUV. I did not move away from it either. For one long second, I stood on the clinic steps with Dr. Morris's paper bag in one hand and my phone in the other, feeling the city shift around me like a trap closing quietly. The message was polite. That made it worse. "Mr. Walker, the Hale family would like to bring you home." Not Dominic. Not the man who had warned me to run. The Hale family. I turned left without thinking, pulling my hood lower as I blended into a group of people crossing at the light. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it over the traffic. I walked 2 blocks, then 3, cutting through a grocery store, leaving through the back exit, and stepping into an alley that smelled like wet cardboard and old snow. I told myself I was being smart. I told myself I could make it to the train, get to my room, grab the envelope, and disappear before sunset. Then a woman's voice behind me said, "Ethan Walker, you are very difficult to protect when you run." I turned and saw her standing at the mouth of the alley beneath a white wool coat, her pale hair pinned neatly at the back of her head, her smile soft enough for a church fundraiser and cold enough to freeze the air between us. I recognized her before she introduced herself. The woman behind the curtain. "Victoria Hale," she said. Dominic's stepmother. 2 men stood several feet behind her, dressed like private security, hands visible, faces calm. No one touched me. No one threatened me. That was how powerful people made fear look respectable. "I do not know you," I said, backing up 1 step. Victoria's eyes lowered for half a second to my stomach, so quick anyone else might have missed it. I did not. "No," she said. "But you are carrying something that belongs to my family." The words hit harder than shouting would have. I wanted to tell her my child did not belong to anyone, not Dominic, not the Hales, not the shadowy families who treated bloodlines like bank accounts. But the alley suddenly felt too narrow, and the security men were already guiding me toward a waiting car with quiet, practiced patience. They did not hurt me. They did not need to. Within 20 minutes, Chicago blurred into gated streets and old money mansions north of the city, the kind of places where every driveway was long enough to hide secrets. Victoria brought me to a private estate with white columns, black shutters, and windows so tall they reflected the gray sky like mirrors. Inside, everything smelled of lemon polish and expensive flowers. She gave me tea I did not drink, a guest room I did not want, and a doctor I refused to see. "You misunderstand me," she said, sitting across from me in a pale blue parlor where a fire burned without warmth. "No one wants to harm you. Your condition makes you valuable. Your cooperation will make you comfortable." I kept both hands around the untouched teacup so she would not see them shaking. "And after the baby is born?" Her smile did not change, but the room seemed to darken. "The child will be raised properly. As a Hale." There it was. The beautiful cage. The future she had already written without asking my name. I lowered my eyes, pretending the words had broken me, because broken people were easier to underestimate. For the next several hours, I listened more than I spoke. I learned which hallway led to the kitchen, which door opened to the garden, which guard checked his phone too often, and which window latch in the powder room did not close all the way. Victoria thought silence meant surrender. She did not know silence was the only weapon I had ever been allowed to keep. By nightfall, rain had replaced the snow, tapping against the windows in thin silver lines. The house grew quieter. Somewhere downstairs, a clock chimed 10. I took the vitamins from Dr. Morris, hid them in my coat pocket, and slipped out of the room with my shoes in my hands. Every step through that mansion felt louder than thunder. I passed portraits of Hale men in dark suits, their eyes following me from gold frames, and wondered how many Omegas had vanished into houses like this with polite smiles and locked doors. The powder room window opened just wide enough. Cold rain struck my face as I climbed out onto the wet stone path, then ran across the garden toward the trees beyond the driveway. I did not look back until I reached the road. Headlights swept over the gates behind me. Someone had noticed. I kept running, one hand pressed against my stomach, whispering the only promise I could make to the life inside me. I will not let them take you. A mile later, soaked through and shaking, I found an old bus stop beside a closed gas station, its cracked plastic roof rattling in the wind. I stepped inside, breathless, and pulled out my phone to call the only number I feared and needed at the same time. But before I could press the screen, a black car stopped at the curb. The rear door opened, and Hale stepped into the rain without an umbrella, his gray eyes fixed on me like he had crossed the whole city on one heartbeat. Dominic did not run toward me, and somehow that made him look even more dangerous, as if every step he took had already been decided before I ever picked up the phone. Rain slid down his black coat and darkened his pale hair, but he did not seem to notice the cold. I stood inside the cracked bus shelter with my back against the scratched plastic wall, one hand around Dr. Morris's paper bag and the other pressed to my stomach. The last time I had seen him, he had let me walk away with an envelope and a warning. Now he looked at me like letting me go had been the worst mistake of his life. "Do not come closer," I said, but my voice shook hard enough to betray me. Dominic stopped immediately. He was still 10 feet away, standing in the rain beside the open car door, his driver waiting silently behind the wheel. "I will not touch you," he said. "I will not take you anywhere you do not agree to go." I almost laughed, because every powerful person I had met that week had spoken gently right before deciding my future for me. "Your stepmother already tried that." His jaw tightened, not with surprise, but with a fury he locked down so fast it frightened me. "Victoria had no right to approach you. She said the baby belongs to the Hale family." The words came out before I could stop them. For the first time, Dominic's control broke. Not loudly. Not violently. Just in the way his face went still, all the color draining from it beneath the rain. His eyes moved from my face to my hand over my stomach, and the whole world seemed to hold its breath with him. "Baby," he repeated, barely above a whisper. I wanted to hate him for not knowing. I wanted to blame him for every mile I had run, every cold smile Victoria had given me, every second I had spent feeling like my body had become a document rich people could argue over. "I found out today," I said. "At a clinic. The doctor said I need to leave Chicago." Dominic closed his eyes for 1 second, and when he opened them again, something in him had changed. The Mafia Alpha everyone feared was still there, but beneath him stood a man who looked as if the ground had disappeared under his feet. Slowly, so slowly I could have stepped back if I wanted, he removed his coat and held it out toward me. "You are freezing." I did not take it. "Is that why you came?" "Because of the air." The word tasted bitter. He flinched as if I had handed him a truth he deserved. Then, in the middle of that empty roadside, with rain falling around us and headlights turning the pavement silver, Dominic Hale lowered himself onto one knee. I stared at him, unable to understand what I was seeing. This was a man who could make rooms go silent by entering them. A man with towers, cars, guards, and a name heavy enough to open every locked door in the city. Yet there he was on the wet concrete in front of a runaway Omega, looking up at me with nothing but regret in his eyes. "I did not know," he said. "If I had known, I would have burned every bridge I had before letting them corner you." My throat tightened, but I held on to my anger because it was the only thing keeping me upright. "You told me to forget your name." "Because my name destroys people who stand too close to it." "Then why should I stand close now?" He looked down, rain dripping from his lashes, and for once he had no perfect answer. "You should not have to. But Victoria knows. Others will know soon. And if you run alone, they will find you before I can stop them." A car passed on the road, its tires hissing through water, and I realized how exposed we were, two shadows under a broken bus shelter at the edge of a city full of people who wanted something from me. I cannot go to your house, I said. I will not live in another cage. Dominic stood, but kept his distance. Not my house. Not the Hale estate. I have a safe place outside the family's reach, 20 minutes from here. A doctor can come there. You can leave whenever you want. The doors will open from the inside. I will put that in writing before you step inside. The offer sounded too careful, too reasonable, and maybe that was why it frightened me. I had been bought with money, moved with silence, and hunted with polite messages. Trust felt like a language I no longer spoke. And what do you want from me? I asked. Dominic's eyes softened in a way that made him look almost human. Tonight, I want you warm, safe, and away from Victoria. Tomorrow, you can decide whether you still want me in the room. The rain kept falling. My phone buzzed again, another unknown number lighting the screen in my palm. This time I did not read the message. I looked at Dominic, at the coat in his hand, at the car waiting with its door open not like a command, but like a choice. I took one step toward him. Then another. He wrapped the coat around my shoulders without letting his fingers brush my skin, and I hated that the warmth made my eyes burn. As I slid into the back seat, Dominic stayed outside a moment longer, speaking quietly into his phone. Find out who helped Victoria track him, he said. And tell the family council that Ethan Walker is under my protection now. He paused, his gaze meeting mine through the rain-streaked window. No. Not as property. As the father of my child. Dominic's safe place was not a mansion, and that was the first thing that made me breathe a little easier. It was a converted brick townhouse on a quiet street in Lincoln Park, tucked behind bare trees and a black iron fence, close enough to the city to hear distant traffic but far enough from the Hale estate to feel like another world. There were no marble staircases, no portraits staring from gold frames, no staff waiting to measure my silence. Just warm lights, polished wood floors, a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee, and locks that Dominic showed me one by one, all opening from the inside. He kept his promise in writing before I even took off his coat. A simple document, signed in dark ink, saying I could leave at any time, that no one would force medical care on me, and that my child could not be claimed by any family without my consent. I read it 3 times while he stood across the room, hands visible, eyes lowered like he understood that trust needed space to stand up again. A doctor arrived after midnight, not one of Victoria's people, but a calm older man named Dr. Samuel Reed, who spoke to me first and Dominic second. That mattered. He checked my vitals, reviewed the clinic papers, and told me I was early enough that rest, food, and steady care were the most important things. When he mentioned the rare alpha markers, Dominic's shoulders tightened, but he did not interrupt. He only asked, is Ethan in danger? Not the heir. Not the child. Ethan. I hated that one question made my chest ache. After the doctor left, I expected Dominic to disappear into calls and plans, but he stayed in the kitchen, heating soup he clearly did not know how to heat. He burned the first batch, apologized. Like a man unfamiliar with ordinary failure, and opened a second can while I sat at the island wrapped in a blanket. I should have been too scared to find it funny, but a tired laugh slipped out before I could stop it. Dominic looked at me as if that small sound had saved him from something. For a moment, the room was quiet in a way that did not feel like a threat. Then an old man entered without knocking, carrying a leather folder under one arm. He was tall but stooped, with white hair, sharp blue eyes, and a cane that touched the floor with a soft tap. Dominic straightened immediately. Malcolm. The old man nodded to him, then looked at me, not at my stomach, not at my scar, but directly at my face. Mr. Walker, he said, and his voice changed on my last name. I touched the small silver pendant under my shirt, a habit I barely noticed anymore. Malcolm noticed everything. Where did you get that? He asked. Dominic stepped forward, but Malcolm lifted a hand. Please. I pulled the necklace free. It was the only thing I had from before my stepfather, a flat oval pendant scratched at the edges, with a tiny tree engraved on one side. I had always been told it was cheap, sentimental, worthless. Malcolm's face went pale. "That is not worthless," he whispered. "That is the Walker crest." My fingers closed around it. "My mother left it to me." "Your mother's name was Clara Walker," Malcolm said. The kitchen seemed to fall away. No one had said her name to me in years. "Your father was Daniel Walker. They did not die in a car accident outside Milwaukee, no matter what records you were given." The blanket slipped from my shoulders. Dominic turned to him sharply. "What are you saying?" Malcolm opened the leather folder and spread old photographs across the counter. A younger version of my mother smiled beside a man with my eyes. In another photo, they stood in front of the Hale estate with a child wrapped in a blue blanket. Me. The Walker family was not ordinary, Malcolm said. They were an Omega bloodline tied to the original Hale succession pact. Their heirs could stabilize Alpha lines that were tearing themselves apart. That made them powerful. It also made them dangerous to people who wanted control. My throat closed around my next breath. Why was I sold, then? Why was I hidden? Malcolm looked at Dominic, then back at me. Because someone wanted the last Walker Omega erased without anyone realizing he was still alive. Dominic's face had gone colder than I had ever seen it, but beneath the cold was horror. "Victoria," he said. Malcolm did not answer quickly enough, and that silence was its own confession. I looked down at the pendant in my hand, at the tiny engraved tree I had carried through every miserable year, never knowing it was not just a memory. It was evidence. Then Malcolm reached into the folder and placed one final photograph on the counter. It showed Victoria Hale in a white dress, standing beside my parents on the steps of the estate, smiling the same soft, freezing smile I had seen from the auction balcony. On the back, written in my mother's handwriting, were 5 words that made the whole room tilt. "If anything happens, protect Ethan." The photograph stayed on the kitchen counter long after everyone stopped speaking, as if my mother's warning had reached across years of silence just to find me at the one moment I needed it most. "If anything happens, protect Ethan." I read the words again and again until they no longer looked like handwriting, but like a door opening beneath my feet. Dominic stood beside me without touching me, his presence quiet but solid, while Malcolm gathered the rest of the papers with hands that trembled only once. For the first time since the clinic, I was not thinking only about running. I was thinking about answers. By sunrise, Dominic had already received the message he expected. The Hale Family Council had called an emergency meeting for that evening at the old estate in Lake Forest, the same estate where my parents had once stood smiling beside Victoria. Dominic did not want me anywhere near it. He said it calmly at first, then less calmly when I told him I was going. "They will twist every word you say," he warned, standing in the townhouse study with his sleeves rolled to his elbows and exhaustion shadowing his face. "They will make you feel small so they can decide your life for you." I held my mother's pendant in my palm. "They already decided my life once. I am not letting them do it again while I hide in a safe house." He looked like he wanted to argue, but Malcolm spoke from the doorway. "If Ethan stays away, Victoria controls the story. If he appears, she has to control the room." That evening, Dominic's car drove through iron gates under a sky the color of wet steel. I wore a dark blue coat Malcolm had found for me and kept Dr. Morris's card in my pocket like a tiny shield. The estate looked different from the night I escaped it, brighter, louder, filled with black cars and people who turned to look as we entered. Dominic walked half a step ahead of me, not to lead me, but to take the first wave of their attention. The council chamber had once been a ballroom. Long windows, high ceiling, polished floor, and a crescent of chairs facing a raised table where the elders of the Hale family sat like judges. Victoria was there in white again, serene as snowfall. Beside her stood a man I had not met, tall, blond, and smiling with the kind of charm that made me instantly careful. "Adrian Hale," Malcolm whispered. "Dominic's cousin." Adrian's eyes moved over me, then to my stomach, and his smile sharpened. "So this is the famous Ethan Walker," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Or should I say the man who appeared from nowhere with a convenient name and an even more convenient claim?" Dominic's voice cut through the murmurs. "You will speak to him with respect." Adrian lifted both hands, still smiling. "I am only asking what everyone here is already thinking. A hidden Walker heir. A sudden pregnancy. A child with alleged alpha markers. All discovered after Dominic buys him from a private auction none of us authorized. It is almost too perfect." Heat rose to my face, but I made myself stand still. Victoria watched me the way someone watches a glass fill to the rim, waiting for the spill. Adrian placed a folder on the table. "We have documents suggesting Ethan Walker was coached by outside interests to target Dominic and destabilize the Hale succession." The room shifted. Papers passed from hand to hand. I could not see what they said, but I saw the effect. Suspicion moved faster than truth. One elder looked at me with pity. Another with disgust. Dominic reached for the folder, read the first page, and went completely still. "These are false," he said. Adrian tilted his head. "Can you prove that before tonight's vote?" The word vote made my stomach tighten. Malcolm had warned me the council could suspend Dominic's authority if they believed he had endangered the family line. Victoria finally spoke, her voice gentle enough to sound reasonable. "No one wants to punish the boy. He is young, frightened, and perhaps manipulated. But Dominic's judgment is compromised. Until the child's status is verified, Ethan should remain under family supervision." Family supervision. The beautiful cage in softer words. Dominic stepped forward. "No," an elder at the center of the table leaned back. "Then you leave us with a choice, Dominic. Surrender custody decisions to the council until the investigation is complete, or publicly bind your protection to Ethan Walker and accept that your leadership will be challenged tonight." The room went silent. I understood the trap then. If Dominic let them take me, he kept his throne and lost whatever soul he had left. If he protected me, he risked everything his family had trained him to become. I turned to him, expecting hesitation, anger, calculation. Instead, Dominic looked only at me. "I should have chosen you before you had to ask," he said quietly. Then he faced the council. "Ethan Walker is not under family supervision. He is under my protection by his consent, and if that costs me this chair, then the chair was never worth having." Adrian's smile widened, because he thought he had one. But before the elders could speak, my pendant warmed against my palm, and Malcolm leaned close to my ear. "Now," he whispered. "Show them what your mother left you." I closed my fingers around the pendant and felt the tiny seam Malcolm had shown me that morning, hidden so carefully along the engraved branches that I had worn it for years without knowing it opened at all. Every eye in the council chamber was on Dominic, waiting for him to lose his title, his power. Maybe the only life he had ever been trained to understand. But for the first time that night, I did not let him stand in front of me. I stepped beside him. The room changed when I moved. Victoria's smile faded by a fraction, and Adrian's eyes flickered to my hand. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to be afraid. I pressed my thumbnail into the pendant's edge until it clicked open. Inside was not a photograph, not a lock of hair, not the sentimental memory I had imagined a mother might leave behind. It was a thin silver data chip, sealed in plastic so old it had yellowed around the corners, and beneath it a strip of faded paper marked with the same tree crest Malcolm had called mine. Malcolm took the chip with a care that made the elders lean forward. "This was Clara Walker's failsafe," he said. "It contains the original succession pact between Hale and Walker, medical lineage records, and testimony recorded the week before her disappearance." Victoria rose so quickly her chair whispered across the floor. "This is absurd. An unverified object from a boy who admits he was raised outside any recognized house cannot override council procedure." Her voice was still elegant, but the softness was gone. Adrian reached for his folder again. For all we know, Dominic planted it. That was when Malcolm placed a small projector on the council table. Then let Clara Walker speak for herself. The lights dimmed. The far wall filled with grainy footage of my mother, younger than I remembered from the few pictures I had, sitting in a room I recognized from the old photographs. Her blonde hair was tied back. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were steady. When her voice filled the chamber, my knees almost gave out. My name is Clara Walker. If this record is being opened, then Daniel and I are no longer able to protect our son. The room fell so silent that even the rain against the windows seemed to stop. My mother spoke of a pact older than Dominic, older than Victoria, older than the polished table where the elders sat. The Walkers had not served the Hales. They had balanced them. Their Omega line carried a rare stabilizing trait that allowed certain Alpha heirs to inherit without the destructive instability that had once fractured the family. The next legitimate heir was not meant to be chosen by power alone, but by the union of both lines, freely recognized and protected. Then the footage shifted. My father appeared, placing documents beside my mother. Victoria Hale has urged the council to dissolve the Walker Clause, he said. Adrian's father has offered support in exchange for future control of succession. Adrian's smile vanished. Victoria's face turned perfectly blank, which somehow looked more frightening than anger. My mother leaned toward the camera. If Ethan survives, he is the last living Walker child. He is not to be owned, traded, or supervised by any Hale. His consent is required for any claim involving his bloodline. Without him, the succession pact remains incomplete. The video ended, but the truth did not. It sat in the room like a bell still ringing after the sound was gone. One of the elders demanded the medical records. Malcolm displayed them next, names, signatures, dates, blood markers, all connecting me to Clara and Daniel Walker. Then Dr. Reed stepped forward from the back of the chamber, where Dominic had quietly asked him to wait. He confirmed that my current records matched the Walker line and that the child I carried Dominic's Alpha signature. No one said heir out loud at first. They did not have to. The word was already written across every shocked face in the room. Adrian tried to speak, but his voice cracked around the edges. This changes nothing. Dominic compromised the family by bringing him here. For the first time, I looked directly at him. No. You compromised the family by trying to make me disappear before I knew who I was. I expected my voice to shake. It did not. Victoria moved toward the door, but two elders stood in her path, not touching her, only blocking the exit with all the politeness she had once used on me. Dominic turned to the council, his gray eyes hard but calm. You asked me to choose between my chair and Ethan Walker. You were asking the wrong question. Then he turned to me, and in front of every person who had tried to reduce me to a claim, a risk, or a bloodline, he lowered his head. Not as a king. Not as an owner. As a man asking permission. Ethan, he said, I will protect you whether the council recognizes it or not. But I will not claim anything that you do not give freely. My hand closed over the open pendant, over my mother's hidden truth, over the life growing quietly inside me. I looked at the elders, at Victoria's frozen face, at Adrian's crumbling confidence, and finally at Dominic. Then hear me clearly, I said. I am Ethan Walker. I belong to no family that has to trap me to keep me. But my child will not be raised in fear. If the Hale name wants a future, it starts by honoring the Walker one. For a moment, no one moved. Then the eldest council member stood and bowed his head to me. 3 months after the council bowed its head, the Hale estate no longer felt like a place built to swallow people whole. The portraits were still there, the marble floors still shone, and the iron gates still stood at the end of the long driveway, but the silence had changed. Victoria was removed from every family decision after the evidence from my mother's pendant was verified by outside attorneys and medical witnesses. Adrian lost the support he had spent years collecting with smiles and polished lies. Neither of them disappeared into some dramatic ending. They were simply stripped of the thing they valued most, the power to decide other people's lives. Dominic changed too, though not in the way people expected. He did not become softer for the world. He was still Dominic Hale, still calm enough to make dangerous men choose their words carefully, still powerful enough that the city listened when he spoke. But with me, he learned to knock before entering a room. He learned which tea settled my stomach, which blanket I liked on the couch, and how to sit beside me without filling the silence with commands. He moved the family office out of the old estate and turned the Walker wing, sealed for more than 20 years, into a nursery filled with warm light, pale wood, and the tiny silver tree crest my mother had hidden in my pendant. I did not forgive everything at once. Some mornings, I still woke with the old fear in my throat, expecting locked doors and polite voices. On those mornings, Dominic would stand in the doorway, hands visible, waiting until I invited him in. He never asked me to forget what had happened. He only kept proving, day after day, that the future did not have to look like the past. Winter turned into spring, and spring into a hot Illinois summer. Dr. Reed visited twice a week. Malcolm brought old Walker records and told me stories about my parents, not as symbols, not as bloodline carriers, but as people who danced badly in the kitchen and argued about baseball and loved their son enough to hide a whole truth inside a necklace. When the baby came, it was during a thunderstorm in late August, with rain tapping hard against the windows and Dominic sitting beside my hospital bed, pale with worry but steady when I needed him to be. Hours later, I held our son for the first time, small and warm and perfect, with silver-gray eyes that opened just long enough to make every person in the room forget how to speak. We named him Noah Walker Hale, in that order, because Dominic said the name that survived deserved to stand first. The council came the next morning, not with contracts or claims, but with a written oath recognizing my rights, my family name, and Noah's future as something to be protected, not possessed. The eldest member bowed again, this time to the child in my arms and to me. I thought I would feel victorious. Instead, I felt quiet. Free. Weeks later, when the first snow of the season drifted over Chicago, I stood by the nursery window with Noah asleep against my shoulder. The city beyond the glass looked nothing like the night I had been taken to that auction. It looked brighter, gentler, almost new. Dominic came up beside me, close enough to warm the air but not close enough to crowd me. "You once paid for one night," I said softly, watching snow catch on the dark trees below. His face tightened with regret, the kind he no longer tried to hide. "I know." I looked at him then, at the man who had begun as a shadow at the end of a golden room and become the person who chose my freedom even when it cost him power. "And somehow," I said, "that night gave me back my name." Dominic touched